Hi, folks. Welcome. We'll just give it a minute or so for everyone to join. You will be automatically muted and videos off for this webinar. All right, we're gonna get started. So I'd like to thank you all for coming today and welcome to the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment webinar on romance scams. My name is Lauren Parcher. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a social worker with the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, CCFWE. So, for Fraud Prevention Month, we're hosting this webinar to explore the hidden harms of romance scams. So, these scams not only exploit emotional vulnerability, but often lead to devastating economic abuse, stripping individuals of their financial independence and security. So today we have a panel of 4 expert researchers and advocates with experience in fraud awareness, survivor support, and financial empowerment. The agenda for today includes a land acknowledgement, housekeeping guidelines, then we'll do a brief introduction to CCFWE, a brief message from our founder and CEO, Messi, and then we'll move into our panel discussion, which each of our panelists will discuss their area of expertise, and then we'll move into a Q&A section, which includes structured questions, and then questions from the audience, and then closing remarks. So to begin our time together, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territory that CCFWE is located on. CCFWE operates on the unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory and honors their stewardship. On May 5th, Red Dress Day, we remember and honor missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited people. As a grassroots organization, we commit to dismantling barriers to economic resources, especially for Indigenous communities facing abuse. Acknowledging colonialism's ongoing impact, we pledge to work alongside Indigenous peoples, following their lead to restore justice and build a better future. We also welcome you to introduce yourself and the Indigenous territory and nation you're calling from today in the chat. To learn more about the history of your area, you can visit native-land.ca, which is a website to help map Indigenous territories, treaties, and languages across Turtle Island. So before we begin, we'll review some important housekeeping details to ensure a smooth and enjoyable experience for all. So as I stated, everyone's videos is turned off and microphones are muted automatically. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. The chat feature is also available for general comments and discussions. This session will be recorded and shared on CCFWE's website. And then if you're experiencing any technical issues, try reconnecting to the webinar. You can also customize your view by using Zoom layout options. And we'll also be sharing important resources and links in the chat for your reference. If you have any concerns or need assistance, feel free to message Narita, who's also CCFWE on this call. And as I stated, we'll have time for a Q&A and discussion after the panelists present. And then please follow CCFWE on social media and enjoy the webinar, and thank you for joining us today. I would also just like to provide a brief content warning. So please be advised that our panel discussion will cover topics related to trauma and abuse. So this discussion may include personal stories, experiences, or discussions that could be distressing or triggering for some individuals. We want to ensure that everyone feels comfortable and informed while participating in this conversation. So please take breaks from the webinar as needed. If you need resources, please visit our website for further information on support available in your region. So you'll see on the top right of the screen, we've included instructions to our website to find resources specific to your area. So under the tool and support banner, you can find resources and click find help across Canada. So I'd also like to provide a brief introduction to our organization, the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. So we are dedicated to ending economic abuse and promoting financial safety and independence for survivors. Through education, research, advocacy, and policy work, CCFWE addresses systemic barriers, supports survivors, and drives social change. So we have six key mandates. Our first is financial inclusion and empowerment. So at CCFWE, we collaborate with frontline and equity deserving service providers to assist survivors in healing from economic abuse, including generational trauma. By equipping survivors with essential tools and support, we seek to empower survivors to overcome their experience, build resilience, and create a brighter future. Our second is economic security for Black women, refugees, and immigrants. We acknowledge that economic structures rooted in historical colonialism have contributed to the ongoing systemic inequalities. We are dedicated to illuminating these issues, offering resources, and nurturing a community committed to dismantling economic barriers faced by Black women, immigrants, and refugees. Our third is evidence driven research to inform economic justice policy. So we conduct community based research in collaboration with equity deserving groups and financial institutions to address the research gaps on economic abuse in Canada. By comprehensively understanding the multiple layers of this problem and identifying promising practices, we aim to develop an effective policy responses to end economic abuse. Our fourth mandate is public awareness and education. At CCFWE, we are committed to raising public awareness about economic abuse by developing education materials, organizing events, and engaging with communities. Through initiatives like the National Economic Abuse Awareness Day, we aim to foster dialogue and increase understanding of economic abuse and its impact. Our fifth mandate is policy advocacy and systemic change. CCFWE actively advocates for policy changes to address economic abuse and support survivors. This includes engaging with policymakers, financial institutions, and community organizations to implement trauma informed policies and procedures. The organizations policy recommendations focus on areas such as raising public awareness, expanding private and financial sector engagement, and removing existing legal barriers. Our sixth mandate is knowledge translation and integration. We foster collaboration among universities like the University of Windsor, governments, and communities to bridge research, policy, and practice gaps. By engaging diverse stakeholders, leveraging data, and highlighting promising practices, we enhance capacity and drive meaningful change. Our approach ensures a dynamic exchange where research informs policy and practice, while real world insights shapes future research at local, regional, national, and international levels. Oh, my apologies. We would also like to acknowledge that the many women and survivors who have survived intimate partner violence. We recognize their courage, strength, and acts of resistance and resilience. We also acknowledge the services and organizations that work with survivors on their journey to safety and recovery, and those who work to prevent violence before it occurs. We're also incredibly grateful for the support of our funders, the CCFWE's National Task Force for Women's Economic Justice members, our partners, volunteers, summer students, and advocates who have helped us achieve so much in a short time. Now I'm honored to introduce Mezi, the Executive Director and founder of CCFWE. So, Mezi is a multi award winning thought leader and social entrepreneur who has dedicated over 2 decades to advancing women's economic rights and health equity. She has spearheaded numerous initiatives promoting economic justice, collaborating with policymakers, financial institutions, and community organizations to support survivors of economic abuse. Her advocacy has been recognized with accolades such as the L'Oreal Paris Women of Worth Award and inclusion among Canada's top 100 women to watch. Messi's work continues to inspire change, fostering a more inclusive and equitable society for women and girls. Welcome, Messi.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren, for the great introduction. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for this important webinar. I just want to begin by expressing my heartfelt appreciation for the organizer because this event is the very first event in our organization to talk about romance scam. And I really want to acknowledge Lauren for your amazing work. And Dana and my entire team, Nerida, thank you so much for organizing this event. And our remarkable panelists, thank you so much for coming here today and then to share your expertise. And also thank you so much everyone who joined us everywhere across Canada. And your presence is a very powerful testament to our commitment to justice, equity, and safety and empowerment women across the country. And I also appreciate and support and then, gratitude for our funders, WAGE, Women in Gender Equality Canada, the TD Bank Group, North Pine Foundation, the Canadian Heritage, for your generous support. And we are very grateful for that. So in honor of the Canada's Anti-Fraud Month, which is in March, we're very proud to host this panel for the first time, as I said, to shine the light on a hidden but it's very devastated form of abuse, which is romance scam and economic abuse. So romance scam, as you know, it's rising in Canada. And according to Toronto Police, victim almost lost $8.9 million and reported, and in just 1 year. So this scam offer a false promise of connection, but deliver financial, emotional, and even spiritual devastation. So the manipulation wear the mask of love, and it looks like affection, attention, even destiny, but it's a calculated cruel. So economic abuse and financial crime is disproportionately affected Black, Indigenous, racialized, gender diverse individual, and people in disability. So these communities are highly impacted because of systemic barriers. When you are already navigating the systemic racism, poverty, language barrier, and cultural stigma, a scam does not just empty your bank account, it strips away your sense of safety, dignity, and belongingness. Scammers prey on women's vulnerability, while abusers exploit the very system meant to protect us. And let's be honest, for victims, this is very critical and unsafe ecosystem what we have right now. We knew that we have less likely to access legal support or financial education and more likely to be dismissed or disbelieved, especially for survivors. And we often carry the weight of intergenerational trauma, caregiving, and forced silence. We have also witnessed women in gender diverse foxes lose everything, not only their money, but their home, their job, even custody of their children because of economic abuse, financial crime, even they didn't recognize it until it was too late. What makes this form of abuse is very sad is its very complexity. It's a hidden behind love, embedded in itself in culture, in relationship, in institutions, and rarely stand alone and walking instead alongside emotional, verbal, and physical abuse. And yet, despite all this, there is no any national policy, no criminal code, and barely any training available for professionals, even to recognize economic abuse, let alone to respond it. That's why we are demanding system change. We are calling for accountabilities from banks, technology companies, telecom companies, and other institutions, the system we trust. We are pushing the recognition of economic abuse in Canada legal and justice framework. To survivors, you are not weak, you are not foolish, You are absolutely not alone. What happened to you is not your fault. And for the bank, government, tech companies, and business owners and frontline workers, the time has to come to listen, to learn, to lead, and we must create a financial system that protect, not to punish survivors. We must equip women with a digital literacy tool that they need to recognize scam and coercion. We must build cultural sensitive, safe space where Black, racialized, Indigenous, gender diverse, and disabled people can report abuse, to recover with dignity and to rebuild their power. And we must participate on the National Economic Abuse Awareness Day because silence is a strong weapon for abuser, and we need to break the cycle. So economic abuse is not just about dollar. It's all about dignity. It's all about justice. It's all about the right to live free from financial fear and manipulation. So at the Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment, we are building Canada where survivor rise, where community heals, where economic justice become not a privilege, but it's a right. Because we empower survivors, we don't just transform individual life, we shift the entire systems. And special thanks for our today panelists, Davy, Julie, Michael, and William for joining us. And I'm so excited to hear about your insight and expertise on this specific subject matters. And thank you so much for your voice. I know we are going to learn so much about you, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Messi. So now I would like to introduce our four panelists today. So Debbie Montgomery Johnson is a fraud awareness and victim support advocate. She shares her personal experiences with romance scams to educate others. Debbie is the chairman of the board of directors at the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, SCARS, a worldwide non-for-profit cybercrime victims assistance support and advocacy organization focused on supporting relationship scam victims worldwide. She's collaborated with law enforcement, financial institutions, and organizations like NASDAQ, Verifane to provide insights into romance and relationship fraud. Julie Lalonde is an award-winning women's rights advocate and public educator based in Ottawa. Since the early 2000s, Julie has been working to improve the lives of women and girls in Canada with a focus on engaging bystanders to create communities of support. Her memoir, Resilience is Futile, The Life and Death of Julie S. Lalonde, was published in spring 2020 and won the Ontario Speakers Award, as well as being named one of the best books of the year by CBC Books and the Hill Times. Michael Lowry has over 30 years of experience working on safety, policy, ethics, and security. He has worked for Match Group for nearly a decade, shaping and leading a safety team for one of the company's smaller brands, OkCupid. He's been vocal about the harms and lack of barriers on these platforms to protect users of these apps, including around romance scams. William Moores is the CEO of the Canadian Association for Financial Empowerment, a non for profit and Canada's leader in financial literacy and counseling certification. With over 25 years of experience in banking, advocacy, policy reform, and professional certification, he is a strong advocate for policy driven financial empowerment. Under his leadership, the Canadian Association for Financial Empowerment, formerly the Ontario Station of Credit Counseling Services, has become a nationally recognized body with legal standing to uphold ethical and professional standards in financial counseling. William has played a key role in shaping Canada's financial literacy strategy and legislative reforms to protect consumers from predatory practices. As a proud Newfoundlander now residing in Ontario, William is a member of the 2S LGBTQIA and neurodivergent community. His vision for the Canadian Association for Financial Empowerment promotes a human first approach to financial literacy, centering education without judgment, counseling with compassion, and fostering collective action to ensure all Canadians have access to financial stability. So thank you and welcome to our panelists. So now they'll each share about their area of expertise before we move into our Q&A section. So I'll introduce Debbie first.
Thanks, Lauren, for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm coming to you from Southern Florida, and I love my Canadian friends. First, I want to say thank you to Missy. Also, after her great introduction, I'm not sure there's a whole lot I have left to say, but I am an advocate, professionally not, but it's something I was thrown into 12 years ago when I actually became a victim, and I do not use that word lightly, and I do not like to call myself that, but I was expertly manipulated in a 2-year relationship fraud. It's not going to change the verbiage here. Is I use scam. We use scam quite frequently, but it's not a strong enough word for what's happening here. It's actually financial fraud, and it's perpetrated by organized criminals. And I've learned that over the years, as I've become the face and the voice of the victim, of the survivor, of the thriver, of what I call the advocate now. I do work with the organization here in the States. It's an international organization called SCARS, a Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. I got involved with SCARS a couple of years after my adventure ended, and it was all chronicled in my book, The Woman Behind the Smile. I realized that at one point when friends mentioned online dating, and that's why I'm so interested in having Michael here, is that when it happened to me, everybody told me that it was my fault. I did it, from the dating site to the banks to my friends and family members. And so I just shut down and I stopped talking. And when I was meeting with some friends one time and somebody mentioned online dating, I rolled my eyes at them and they said, "Give, what's that about?" And over that weekend, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one that this had happened to, but I was the only one willing to speak up. And I wasn't going to let that happen, because when I realized that it could have been my mother, my best friend, my daughter, my son, anybody that could have been taken, it was then incumbent upon me to not be the victim, but to use my voice to stand up and speak up, to let others know that this was happening, to beware and be aware. And it's so important because only 3 out of 100 victims will report. And that means 97 are not, and the criminals are running their way to the bank. And the numbers that Messi gave are high, but the real number is exponentially bigger, because we don't know how much is being sent over. We don't know how much, because people are not willing to speak. I know I wasn't. And so right now I'm working with SCARS, and I'm working with the Women Behind the Smile. I'm working with financial institutions, law enforcement, because we need to see from the victim side, from the survivor side, how this affects us, our families, our friends, our communities, our banks, our law enforcement. It affects everybody. And we've got to get past the victim blame. So I go right to, it was not my fault. It is not a victim's fault that this happens. We are not alone. We are here to work together to understand how this happens. I mean, I can't wait. Like I said, I can't wait to hear Michael's side, because I always wondered, why aren't we being protected by the dating platforms or the words with friends or social media? Why are we being blamed by law enforcement for something that I wouldn't normally have done? My background is I was an Air Force officer. I was a senior bank manager. I had legal experience. I should not have been taken. Doesn't matter. I lost my husband suddenly. And so I was at a point where, I wasn't looking, I wasn't desperate, but I wanted family, I wanted friends, and this is where it happens. And I'm so glad that this is being addressed in this community, because it is very underreported. In SCARS, we really don't have a lot of women of color, and men and women. I deal mostly with the women. We do not hear from them. And I have a lot of friends that have been taken that are ladies of color, and they know that it doesn't matter if you're white, black, Indian, whatever, old, young, it's going to happen to all of us at some point. We don't want it to happen to anybody, but until we take it seriously and learn that this is a crime against humanity, it's a crime against men and women. It is a crime against families, and we need to take it seriously and be there for the victim, be there so that she or he becomes a survivor and a thriver. And we can do that through support of organizations like you guys and the Canadians, the Americans, everybody. I mean, it's amazing to me that it doesn't get talked about until somebody has something happen to them or their family members. If the head of Match Group's mother had been taken, we would hear this, it would be different. If a congressman's mother had been taken, or wife or daughter had been taken, it would be a different conversation. So that's why we are here as a collective organization, to make it a different conversation. And I thank you guys for reaching out to me. As you can tell, I am really passionate about the survivors and helping them out. And I appreciate y'all being here to help me with this message. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks so much, Debbie. Michael, would you like to provide an introduction?
Hi, you lot. I'm Michael Laurie. I live in the middle of nowhere in Nova Scotia on Mi'kmaq territory. As you can tell from the accent, I'm not originally from here. As Debbie says, I'm coming at this from the opposite side. I'm coming at this from the dating sites, which is traditionally where most romance scamming starts. They have shifted their methods a little bit over the last few years, but I would say that still 95% is going to be on dating sites. Discussions like this, I often feel like the bad guy, but don't think I'm here defending dating sites. I'm absolutely not. I've had 39 years in trust and safety. I just rounded up to 40 now. I've worked on quite a few dating sites from the start of their existence. 2007, I did a brief stint at OkCupid, which in those days was it was an independent dating site that catered a lot to the neurodiverse, the LGBT community, minorities. So it was the cool dating site. When TV comedians would want a dating site to mention, it would always be OkCupid, whereas these days it would be Tinder or Grindr. So OkCupid was the cool kid on the block when I first worked for them in 2007. I was asked to come back to OkCupid to manage moderation in 2013. And by that time it had been bought by Match Group. Now, it was a big myth that OkCupid changed a lot when it was bought by Match Group. It didn't. Match Group didn't really interfere that much in OkCupid until at least 4 or 5 years later. But that's not really interesting to this lot. I stayed at OkCupid and Match Group in a variety of roles for just under a decade. I was the group's first ever head of user safety and user advocacy. So technically speaking, being a complete pain in the arse and trying to defend users was actually my role there. So I spent my last year at Match working on a big whistleblower case about safety issues being ignored. That was from within. When I failed from within, I left and carried on from outside. Again, this pretty much guarantees I'll never get a job in a dating site again. As Debbie says, though, nobody from dating sites has ever come out and talked about any of this, and I do think it's important, and I was one of the best placed people in the company to do that, so it's needed. I know Match Group well. I don't think me talking will change them in any way, but at least it's getting some things out there, so hopefully from the prevention point of view, outside of Match Group, it might help. Most of my later work was on legal issues, serious escalations, so you're looking at murders, child abuse, serious assaults, things like that. So I was a bit out of the scam thing by the end of my career, but I did have teams working on general trends. So that's looking at things going on the site. So unusually for any site, we had a team of 3,500 volunteers, which the site had picked. And one of the things they did was to look for new scam attacks. Scammers are very clever. It's a huge business. People don't understand that this is a multi-billion-dollar business. The scam business is bigger than Match Group. And these aren't idiots. They pretend to be idiots because that's how they'll rope you in, but they're not idiots. This is huge business funded by big countries. So they're not stupid. And one of the things that we needed to do was spot automated attacks. Now, a scammer, I can probably go into this later, but I won't. I'll just do a quick one. But the scammer, when they first come on, they're looking at 12-hour window where they can do what they do. So they've got to drop a payload, which is the introduction to as many people as they can. So they'll be using thousands of accounts they purchased from people who sell accounts. That's part of the business. And they'll be sending out these messages, and they've got 12 hours then for somebody to respond, sweet talk them into getting off the site, because that's their aim. They want you off the site where we can't do anything about it. At OkCupid, I think we got them down to 6 hours, which I would say is the best in the industry. Facebook, you're looking at 6 weeks if they even do it at all, to take a scammer down. So 6 hours is good, and that would be half the time that any of the other groups. Saying that, this was all down to human effort. I had a fantastic team, mostly neurodiverse, mostly LGBTQ people, mostly very heavily balanced female. And they had, I think I lost 100 years of experience in about 2 weeks when most of the team left. And they left of their own accord. They weren't laid off, and that was terrible. In the end, I think by the time I'd left, we'd probably lost 150 years of experience, and that was all outsourced to the Philippines. Scams were never taken very seriously. It was part of my role, but my role had been taken away doing the serious escalations. But I did have a very good team doing scams, and we had volunteer teams as well. We could never get engineering effort. Big corporations, you're bidding for engineering time, and moderation, trust and safety is a cost sink. We never make a profit. All we're ever seen as a loss. So when I say I want 60 hours engineering time to build me a scam detector, they'd say, bugger off, Michael, you're not having it. Show us a profit, you can have it. We're never going to show you a profit. We're never going to get engineering time. Scams were never taken seriously. I'm sorry, Debbie, you're not going to like this. Our chief security officer, mother-in-law, was scammed for $600,000. Nothing changed. No interest in changing it. It's big business. It's, yeah, we can't help it, but I don't think Match Group is helping anybody. I think people within Match Group want to help people. I did a Democracy Now! Interview and was cut off right at the very end when I was going to say that our legal department in Match Group was actually fantastic. There are people who've been there for 15 years who are really dedicated to this stuff, but they're not being allowed to do their job. They take in trophy hires, they take in big names to do this, who come in not having a clue what they're doing. They're ex-cops working in big cities. They don't understand this at all. So, sorry, I'm going to depress you. I'll stop now.
Thanks, Michael. Julie?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, the nature of our work, Michael, is to just be a buzzkill. So I think everyone here is used to it. I'm based in Ottawa, which is unceded Algonquin territory, but I'm originally from small town Northern Ontario. I also have a disability that means I can't look at blue lights without my orange lenses, so that's why I look like this. And I am a survivor of intimate partner violence. I was stalked by an ex-partner for over a decade. And I have spent, actually was doing this work before it happened to me. So I've been doing work in Canada for over 23 years to address gender-based violence, primarily through things like bi-center intervention and the community care piece. So I just wanted to actually focus on build on what Debbie said about the shame, the blame, the like, this could never happen to me. You're clearly stupid. Like, I was a women's studies major who grew up in a very, very feminist family who was in an abusive relationship. So it has absolutely nothing to do, like, I went to school on scholarship. I'm a smart cookie. That's absolutely nothing to do with the level of intelligence you have, the level of feminism you subscribe to, like how empowered you are in the world, like how privilege, nothing. It is 100% about the behavior of the other person. And so I just wanted to speak, just use my comments to talk about the context a bit about how there's a reason why it is women that are overwhelmingly being scammed in these contexts. I also want to name that, yes, these types of horrific, what we would call sort of stranger targeting scam fraud cases are a problem. They are a growing problem, absolutely. But most of the financial abuse and that women experience is from someone they know, someone who is very really a person in their community, truly their husband, truly their partner. And then it's a continuum of things. So in my case, it was not being able to, I had no money, I was a student, and he had money. And so he framed it as a sort of chivalrous thing that I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to pay for things. But then it turned into, oh, wait, I don't actually have access to any of my money. So even though I didn't have a tremendous amount of money and I didn't leave more indebted than I showed up, essentially, there was sort of this chivalrous sort of patriarchal idea that, like, this is me taking care of you and taking care of the money, and you don't know what you're talking about, so let me take care of it. and then I couldn't afford to leave. And so that is a very common form of economic abuse that people experience that we need to name. But also just, like I said, the context of where these things happen and the way in which romance is framed in our culture has a huge impact on people being targeted. So first of all, like, seeking love is not a pathetic thing to do. And I think a lot of times when people look at folks who've been scammed, who've experienced these kinds of frauds, it's sort of like, why did you even care in the first place? It's like human beings were meant to hunt, gather berries, fall in love, and build community. Like, it's nothing else we impose like in life, but like human beings are programmed to be in community, to seek being accepted by other people. And so it is a natural, I would say, sort of instinct. Even aromantic people seek to be in community in some way, right? So that inclination to want to be seen by someone, to be cared for by someone is not, I think, something to denigrate or to think, well, if you didn't have that in your life or that desire, you wouldn't have been scammed, because I think it's an instinct that we all have. And I can be a hardcore feminist and someone who's a survivor of intimate partner violence who also loves romance. I co-host a podcast where we read romance novels. So like, I'm here for it. And I think that's important, I think, to name, because there's this idea that like romance is the problem, or seeking romance sets you up to be targeted. And it's like, no, not at all. Most of the people who are on dating sites are who they say they are, and they're not going to fraud you. So again, it is not our instinct to look for love that's the problem. And the last thing I wanted to say, because I want to hear from other folks, is also the reality that women are socialized to be benevolent. We are socialized to be caring. And I cannot tell you the amount of survivors that I've worked with in my career who left a partner because they were suffering from an acute mental illness that made them very violent. And people thought, how dare you leave him in his time of need? Or, you know, they lost their job and they weren't willing to look for a new job. And so they were draining their bank account, and the woman saying, I can't do this anymore. And people saying, he's in need. Could you do that to him? And we see that in the stats. And I'm going to read them for you because I am also neurodivergent. I have dyscalculia, which means I can't do numbers for you so I don't mess them up. So if a woman is married to a man and gets diagnosed with cancer, there is a 20% divorce rate. If a man is married to a woman and he gets cancer, it's a less than 2% divorce rate. So again, women are, your partner is sick, your partner is out of a job, your partner needs money, your partner needs support, give. And then if that turns out to be a fraudulent claim, people are like, well, you're stupid. Why didn't you see that coming? But if you left that person or you cut them off in that moment, people would say, he's in crisis. How dare you do this to him? And so women find themselves between a rock and a hard place where it seems like there's no right choice to make. And the ultimate conclusion is, you silly goose, why did you let this happen to you? And so I think understanding the context of how these things operate inherently allows us to be empathetic towards people. And also fundamentally, fraud 101, whenever people, whether it's cults, whether it's, you know, multi-level marketing, whether it's fraud, there's always that smug attitude of like, that could never happen to me. But fraud is a numbers game. So if you didn't get caught by the romance fraud, you're going to get caught by the CRA is here to tell you that you owe taxes, or you know, someone calls you with AI to say they're in prison and need bail money. Like, there is a fraud that will work on every single human being. All of the research in the world shows that. So dismount from a high horse if this has happened to you, because you are not better than the folks who've been scammed. It's just your number wasn't called in that particular instance. And again, understanding that is inherently building empathy towards those who have been targeted. And I think that empathy piece is what's really missing. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. William?
Thank you very much. And that was a wonderful segue into welcoming myself, William Moores, to speak on this topic. Is very personal to me. It's been a lifelong career of both working in banking and fraud and also social services, with my role as CEO at the Canadian Association for Financial Empowerment. And empathy is the key in all of this for us, is making sure that you leave space to give yourself grace and to recognize that romantic scams, they are abuse, and that you as a survivor it's not your fault. It's not yours to carry. And I know, coming from my background and growing up in Newfoundland as a gay neurodivergent child who felt very othered, I was very confused, and I often sought opportunities to find connection, to find love, or to feel validated. And something that I heard from another session was that we as humans, we all are wearing a name tag that say, I want to be loved and I want to be needed. And so at a base core line, we are all seeking that to some degree in our own way. And oftentimes we can get human, very human. And it's very natural for that, but there are things that we can do. So I moved from Newfoundland, came to Ontario, and in banking, I got to see a lot of different various fraud rings, groups, internationals, and how they work, and the various channels and how you could address it. But I can say that romantic scams have been here for a very long time. This is not new. It's just gaining new traction in terms of the technology that they're using. My background's in behavioral sciences and computer sciences. And so as it relates to the behavioral side, it's understandable that they are preying on those who are already in moments of deep insecurity, perhaps at a moment of just not understanding what this person's talking about, but giving the benefit of the doubt. I've seen many individuals where they are focusing on the wanting to be accepted or to people please, and in turn being exploited to the nth degree, and how the community treats stigma and how the victim is typically ostracized or put to blame in every possible way. It's the reason for myself why I could never bring myself forward to seek out police services or to ask for support, because I knew what would happen to me, and I was still trying to live through what exactly happened, what it meant, without having any supports, but at the same time knowing that it wasn't safe to go out to the systems that we see and are told that are there to protect us, when in actuality, that never seems to be really the case, or maybe so more now as we move forward with this advocacy. So in creating Cafe, it was really strongly built upon that foundational core of what was missing. So it's really great to address financial literacy. That's wonderful. You can do great things when you have a balanced budget, but it's more than that. And so for Cafe, it's about all of the things that are about a person that are beyond the numbers, and being able to respect and approach things with curiosity, with empathy, and to listen for in between those lines for opportunities where perhaps an individual that, for practitioners out there, if you're working with someone, they may not be ready yet to disclose that something very tragic has happened to them. But it's important for you to listen for that. There is training available, and it's very important to be able to make that space safe, where that individual can find themselves, to know that they can trust the person they're speaking with and have those conversations, and then the appropriate lines can be put into place. So our certification is the Accredited Financial Counselor Canada program, and it's all about being non-judgmental, without bias. We have a strict code of ethics and the standards of practice that you are not permitted to push any products, but it's about working with the human side of all of the things that make that person that person. And that includes all of the generational trauma and all of the experiences, all the inequity in access, as well as marginalization that exists, and at a prominent rate in Canada. We do research at the association that over 65% of Canadians, 65%, and I'm sure the number is much higher than that, are either managing or in vulnerable or already in alert or crisis scenarios in relation to their financial wellness and their overall emotional health. And so when these scams take place, whether it's through AI or through dating apps or through whatever channel they take to gain your trust and to take the money from you, hurt your credit, it's far more than just a ding on your credit score. It is the access that you don't then have to, whether housing or to get insurance or to get benefits, there's a complete circle and rolling stigma that then follows you throughout that entire period, while you're also dealing with the internal grief of trying to understand yourself and what that means and how that defines you moving forward and where you find your strength. So all of these things are working at the same time, and we must be cognizant to make space for that and to have compassion for ourselves, to know that it's a difficult thing, but it's not your fault. You're human, and it's okay to be human, and it's okay to just sit with it and to reach out to places that are safe, that make you feel safe. And when I say that, a lot of places can say that they're safe, but you need to feel it. So if you reach out to someone and you're speaking with them or working with them, and they are giving you any kind of feeling in any which way that make you feel or have any question that it doesn't really feel like a fit, it is okay for you to switch and go somewhere else. It's actually quite important. The connection that you have in terms of accountability for your story, that's yours to own. And working with individuals like this and doing research and listening to the stories of survivors, you can know that your story can be an amazing one. So I want to thank you for having us here today, and look forward to more conversations on this in the future.
Thank you, folks. So now we're just going to move into some structured questions. So the first question is, what advice do you have for survivors navigating the emotional and financial aftermath of a romance scams, especially when seeking legal support?
Well, I could start.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing I would recommend, just from personal experience, is documenting everything. That includes also when you're going through the scenario pre-seeking support, because you're starting to question yourself, you're doubting yourself, and am I crazy? Is this really happening? What's going on? What are the signs that are giving me pause? I like the phrase that if you're going on a date and you have butterflies in your belly, that's probably not a good sign, like we were told, to really trust in that. But for working with specifically in the aftermath, is having that documentation and keeping everything. Those are receipts, any passing of gifts or acknowledgements in any regard, screenshots as well, if you can have them. Anything that you can have to trace and show what that story and timeline is will be critical and helpful as you seek those supports.
I found for me that the first thing, I had my mother and dad there because I actually got them involved for $100,000. So my moral hurt was that they were there with me when we took documentation into the FBI, who I thought it would be able to get the money back, take care of me, do whatever. I watch a lot of TV, right? When I got there and they said, well, we're really sorry, this happens to more men than women in Palm Beach County for over $1 million. There's nothing we can do because we can't get the guys here. So that shut me down. But what I did have was the support of some people that I trusted, who were non-judgmental, who were there to walk me into the office, to walk me home afterwards and say, you were not alone. That's really important. It's important to find that either that support group later on, or someone that you trust in your family, not necessarily to get your money back, because you probably won't ever, but to get your life back and to get your power back, your control back, because it's very difficult to do anything after that. Especially, I mean, I'd lost my husband, so you know, you're lost financially, you're lost economically, you're lost emotionally, and you need someone there to help you take one step forward, two steps back, one step forward. And it's very difficult. And don't just take anybody, because there are a lot of scammers out there, a lot of criminals that are going to be the detectives, that are going to be the the investigators that are going to help you get these things back. Don't trust any of that. So I say get a trusted buddy. You know, we did it in the financial institutions that I worked with. You have to have a trusted buddy, a trusted person, a trusted contact, that you feel, like William said, that you feel comfortable with, that you feel safe with, because safety has been ripped out. You know, that your heart's been ripped out, your bank account's been ripped out, everything's been ripped out of you when this happens, and then that whole self-blame. So it's a lot easier to forgive somebody else than yourself. learn how to forgive yourself, and learn how to, take responsibility, because you were part of it. You weren't responsible, but you were part of it. And the only way to recover is to acknowledge that it happened and say, I'm ready to move forward.
Thank you, Debbie and William. Our next question is, what role do stigma and victim blaming play in discouraging survivors from seeking help? And how can we challenge these narratives to foster a more supportive environment? I know some of you folks touched on this in your introductions, but if you'd like to speak to that directly.
I think I would just reiterate what I said around for all of us to recognize, even if you haven't been impacted by this or you're not at risk of it because you're in a long-term relationship or something like that, to recognize that, again, you might enjoy consuming content, a lot of true crime content about scammers, and it might just be like wildly fascinating to you, and cults, and like we're in a time right now where everybody just loves like mainlining this content. But I think it dehumanizes and depersonalizes that there is very little difference between you and the person in that documentary who's been scammed. Again, scam and fraud is a game of numbers. And if you're thinking a religious cult wouldn't come to me, but it might be love, it might be concern for an elder, it might be like there's so many ways in which we could get scammed. And so I think recognizing that and really kind of checking yourself in terms of your assumptions means that you can be more supportive, and you move the sort of condescension, which keeps people quiet. The amount of times, so as I said, I was in an abusive relationship. I was stalked for many, many years. And then he died suddenly. And so then I came forward and I started telling my story. And the amount of people, even in interviews, like I was live on CBC radio, and they were like, but I've interviewed you for years as an advocate for other women. Can't believe this was happening to you. And it's like, that is inherent. There's victim blaming inherent in that question. Even if it comes from a place of curiosity, it's like, you? And the fact that when I give a talk, I have to tell people I grew up in a loving home. Like, I had self-esteem. I was smart. Like, the fact that I have to give all of these caveats for people to have empathy for what happened to me is inherently a problem. And so, yes, we know that there are social determinants of health. We know, as Debbie said, there are things that can make you more vulnerable. For example, if you are already struggling with something, if you like, absolutely. But again, that is someone who took advantage of the state that you were in. It was not that you advertised to people, come and scam me. And I think, again, our current culture thinks that like consuming these stories is educational from that kind of true crime lens. But I think it's actually like dulling people's empathy for other, because you can sort of literally other yourself and be like, what a nut, like that wouldn't happen to me. And then someone in your life might be going through that, and they see the way you talk about these stories and they think, well, I'm never going to tell you because you blamed her, which means you're going to blame me as well. And I shouldn't have to give you a 10-page resume to be like, I'm a trustworthy person who's worthy of love before you care about how I was harmed. Like, check yourself if that's what you sort of observe is going on around you. Yeah.
I want to get right on what Julie said, because I've been on CBS, NBC, ABC, national TV, and during sweeps weeks, and my daughter called me and she said, Mother, that was so condescending. I said, I understand that they're trying to get the ratings. I said, but what I'm trying to do is to get past that, because we have to train the media. You don't ask a rape victim what they did wrong. What did you do? You don't ask domestic violence people, what did you do wrong to get hit with hit in the head? They don't ask those anymore. We are in this particular area about 25 years behind domestic violence. Because I say, if you walked into a police department with a black eye 25 years ago, they'd say, Mom, go home and be nice to your spouse. Today, they'll go and arrest that person. When I walk into a police department with a victim and they laugh at us, I just want to put my arms around them and say, don't you understand? This was not her fault. Please just give us a police record number so that they can maybe go get public assistance. They might be able to take this to the bank to report the crime. Don't laugh at us, because the self-blame is bad enough. That will shut a victim down in a heartbeat. But to have outside blame, outside, skepticism is not the right word, but it just discourages people. Why do you think only 3 out of 100 people report? It's because we are made bad. We are made to feel bad to report it. And we have to. The first part of getting your power back and reclaiming your recovery is to report it. Report it to somebody. We won't get the money back, but we'll get our decency back. We'll get, we're not stupid. The women I work with are some of the most brilliant people financially, they just know they got their stuff together. They were caught up, like Julie said. It was just a matter of numbers. So if you say it's not going to happen to you, God bless you. I hope it doesn't. But what about that woman sitting beside you who is bobbing her head? If you're not listening to her or looking for those cues, those silent cues, something is happening to somebody around you. And if you're not aware of it, they're going to go out by themselves, and it could lead to severe depression because it's very traumatic. It could lead to suicide. It will lead to them not having their bank accounts or maybe losing their homes, losing their families. It is a really big problem. And by blaming us and this, you can tell it affects me, but it's been 12 years for me, 13 years for me. Someone that this happened to last week, they are just going to hide under a rock and never talk unless we are encouraging and supportive of them. So being able to speak about it is huge in your recovery. And I encourage everybody, like we've all said, you are not alone. This is not your fault. Feel the support that we have here for you. And there are organizations, I know at SCARS, I work with survivors every day on how to take the next step forward to reclaim your life. Because you can't change the past. We can't change what happened to us, but we can change what's going to happen to the next person that is going to be on match group.
And
Yeah.
I'll jump in as well, if that's okay. The whole thing about stigma has been conditioned upon us since birth, and for most cases, being told to close the curtains, to not let the neighbors see, to not tell anyone else about what we're doing or what the family is talking about, whether it's finances or other. It's a social conditioning and grooming that's been that exists that is being exploited. But also there's the messaging and communication that happens from organizations and the places that you go as well that are not making space for those safe conversations because of the messaging not existing or their denial of it actually being an issue. So we need to have a stronger effort with organizations, that's with banks, corporations, government, that's provincial and federal, etc., to make space for this conversation. For 65% again to be in denial and to not want to disclose or talk about that they are having financial issues can speak to the exact same way the stigma affects them for not wanting to speak out, because they are in their minds thinking that they're such a failure, that it's all their fault, that it's something that they did wrong because society has taught them by not being able to open the windows and speak to your neighbor or to disclose what's happening, that they feel like they're the only one that's having that experience. When in actuality, it's a majority of Canadians that are feeling that way potentially, but are putting on a smile and a mask and hiding it because they don't feel safe to talk about it. So we need to have more spaces to have the conversation more publicly. These sessions right here now are part of that process. And as well, the responsibility and social responsibility of organizations to make space for that as well for their employers, whether that is through EAP programming, to have education and support so that individuals who need to find a safe space or need to get access to that information, they don't have to dig so far to find it. Stigma, for me, it held me back for so many years because I had built up such a story in my mind of all the causality that would happen if I had just admitted what was never my fault to begin with. And yet I owned that for years, and it stunted my growth, it stunted my relationships. And it does this in a variety of ways depending on the person. So for stigma, I'm not about it, and the erasure of it would be a great day.
Thank you, folks. So I will note that we're going to be going about 5 to 10 minutes over the allotted time that we had for our webinar. So if you do have to leave, we understand. We'll make sure to share the resources we review at the end of the webinar with folks, and as well as there will be a recording available of the webinar. So the next question is, how can financial institutions, tech companies, and policymakers collaborate to prevent and address romance scams more effectively?
guess I can do the tech company part. It's hard. From the tech company's point of view, we don't see what happens after the scam generally. So I'm finding a lot of this fascinating because I don't really know what happens after we stop the scammer. But saying that, I'm looking at the other responses that we do for, say, serious assaults, things like that. So one of the things I used to say on my internal bio that it was my aim to be the one person in the company who would be there to give a response when somebody emailed in to a faceless corporation that they never expected to receive a reply from. And I instilled that in my team, that every single person who's emailing in about something serious, some crime committed, some financial fraud, will get a response. And even if it's just us saying, here's some resources, we, and more to the point, drumming it into them that we're here to help you. And I think people think that companies like Match Group are not willing to help. Every single person in my team wanted to help. So we've got the power to give all the messages, every single message that came on there, every single message from that scammer, all the 30,000 people they might have contacted. And we can send that to the police, but it needs a subpoena. We can't do it on our own. So somebody, and I have to say, sorry, we've got to put this on the victim. Somebody has to go to the police, the FBI, report it, and then get them to do a subpoena, because it's one-sided. I'm afraid it has to come from the person who was scammed. And much as I would absolutely love to send all this data to the FBI, I'd be lynched in the street by privacy people saying you just can't do that. And I can't. I understand that. But what we would do if people contacted us, and it was always our policy to say, if a victim contacts us, we will do our absolute best to point them in the right direction and to reassure them that we'll do everything we can to give the information. And from a tech point of view, I think that's the best we can do other than prevention. But I have to say, all that resource is now gone.
Well, I would like to speak to that as well, is that we need to challenge that idea, because there's so much more that Privacy Protection Commission offices, etc., can do in relation to not having to have an individual tell their story over and over and over and over again to every individual that they have to go through that ladder, when all of these services are community services or can be connected together to help waylay that traumatic experience from having to be relived systemically. And that's through working together and having legislative reform that provides for the partnering of organizations in a correct way. Would have to work through a policy group, but to ensure that individuals and the focus is client first and client centric. So the individual survivor, when they come through and they first tell someone within the community that of their story, and this is added to that file, and then they need additional services or to be triaged throughout into their community of services, that file can be carried with them and not have to be something that they're always advocating on behalf of themselves and having to convince someone once again about the experiences that wasn't theirs to really own in that way. We put all of the effort onto the survivors, and we put all of the effort onto the very sickest of us to advocate the most, and it makes absolute no sense. So the more that we can do to require our policymakers who make policy and the groups that are there to support the organizations and the way that we all operate and work together collaboratively in this country and others, that there are ways to work together and to do so without not worrying about self-preservation as an organization, more so than the needs and the right thing to do just because it's basic human decency.
I found, though, just very quickly, is that when I went back to try to report it, there was nothing on the websites that I could see. You know, all the disclaimers and whatever are snuck at the bottom. There's no public service announcement. I mean, I own a vitamin supplement company. I have to have FDA disclaimers everywhere. I did not see any of that on the dating site, at the bank, anywhere. And so and even afterwards, talking with victims and survivors recently, I'm like, guys, did you ever get any sort of pushback or any sort of assistance from the dating sites or from Words with Friends or from Facebook? No, nothing. And I know it's it's business and it's a bottom line for them, and it's not about safety and prevention, but especially the websites, the dating sites for over 50. I mean, we can be pretty techy and pretty knowledgeable, but there's no sort of like, well, be careful. I know prevention doesn't always work because we do a lot of preventive work. It's like going to my father, who's a dentist. Nobody wants to brush their teeth or floss their teeth until they get a cavity. Well, in this particular case, if I had seen something that said a little bit, whoa, be careful, if you see this and this, I know we're not supposed to send money, but no one, by the time I started sending money, that group had become my family. I let my guard down because I would do anything for my family. I used to say that. So now maybe we need to have a few more of those little be carefuls rather than hiding the disclaimers in legalese. Just saying.
One of the things that we used to do was scour places like Reddit and things like that for people talking about stuff that had happened on the site. And then if we could find them, and bearing in mind privacy again, we're not really allowed to be looking into people. If we could find them or we could respond on Reddit, we would, just to tell them to contact us properly. But that's so rare. I mean, you talk about Facebook. I'm absolutely appalled by Facebook. I report obvious scammers that anybody could tell you that was a scammer just by looking at them for 2 seconds. And I get a message back 6 weeks later from Facebook saying, we've not done anything on this, as they've not broken any rules. It's absolutely insane. Just to respond to William a little bit, the EU has some really good laws now on this sort of thing, and they're really pushing sites like Match into transparency. So hopefully things will change with the EU, because the EU are a big customer. There's a big customer base, and we can't ignore the EU. So hopefully there's a slight good possible future.
Well, it's our generation's challenge to make a better future for the generations to follow us, right? So these are the conversations and the time to push that ceiling higher. And just to a comment that just caught my eye there, I no longer reply to any texts that I don't recognize at all. So Nimra, I'm with you there 100%.
Thanks, folks. And I'm just going to have just one last question to close us out. How can social service and law enforcement agencies improve their response to romance scams?
Listen, be kind to the victim, and realize it could be family members. This is not a person that is I hate the stupid word, but we are not. And we just need someone to listen and to understand that. Just give us a report number, just provide us with the basics so that we can move forward and get support elsewhere if we need to, but just no victim blame. That's my bottom line. Don't blame the victim. It was not their fault.
And continual ethical training for the staff as well. Because if you're showing up to work in the uniform, but you're bringing your bias with you, whether or not you have certain predispositions against other people's, don't take it to work. That's not your job. So individuals of color or of other languages or whatever have you, leave your bias to the side, sit and listen with compassion. And yeah, absolutely. Ethical training, ongoing, every year, requirements. It's never not, or it's so important. It should be just a continuous thing.
I would just say that tech is an industry, and industry can be regulated. So we are also and should be regulated. And also that everyday Canadians, like, we're in an election year, so start asking some tough questions. Are you going to regulate? Or what are you going to do legally? For example, the creation of deepfake nudes, that's not illegal in Canada currently. There's no law against it. As many people have mentioned in the chat, right? Like these frauds, these scams, there's very little legal recourse. There's a lot of oh, well, it's someone from a different country. There's nothing we can do. Okay, well, your business is operating in this country, which means You know, and what I say to people all the time is, if I was on Twitter threatening Justin Trudeau's life and telling him I was going to steal his money, CSIS would show up at my door tomorrow. But it happens to everyday people, and we are like, oh, what can I do? It says they're in the Ukraine. Like, so we can start holding them accountable as everyday people, I think, as well. So yes, absolutely, to build on what William said, training, like the experts, we are out here. We want to work with you. So be open to it, recognizing that frontline workers are so often just literally trying to save women's lives, that they don't have capacity to get all this new training on new tech. And so make also supporting your local women's shelter, supporting organizations like
Absolutely.
the Canadian Center for Women's Empowerment. Like, we should have money to be able to train everyday people, but also law enforcement. But also as Canadians, we, like right now in particular, it's like 20 something days to get political parties to care, to support our vote. And one of the demands should be, why are we not regulating tech? And that includes disinformation, misinformation, deep fakes, but also things like these scams that are so, as Michael said, oftentimes so obvious. Like, it's someone in Myanmar, it's so obvious, and we're just like, oh, there's nothing we can do because it's a different country. Nonsense. If you are operating in this country, if I can access it from Ottawa, then it's a Canadian problem, and we need to hold law enforcement, tech, and government accountable for protecting us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's my call to action, I
100%.
guess.
I will add one. I think I'll add two bits actually, very quickly. I think law enforcement needs to understand that the dating sites are not necessarily against them. They will cooperate. And I think I've had massive discussions with Canadian law enforcement who are the pits as far as understanding procedure goes. They don't know how to get a warrant for information from American sites. And that's insane because it would help them so much. They could actually do a lot. And I've sat there in cases where I've got all the information. I can prove who it is. I could tell them who it was. I could tell them who was defrauded. And I'm not allowed to give it to anybody unless they send me a warrant. And I would love to give it to them. There are people in these sites who would love to do that. And the final part is the answer to this is class actions. I think there need to be victim class actions against all of these people because that makes them. I've worked on the back end of 2 class actions and it's so much work. It's thousands of hours of lawyers' work. They don't like class actions. Even if you lose, you still it costs a fortune. So that is the only way to change them, to make the class action more expensive than hiring the people to do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all so much. I just shared a survey link in the chat there to discuss what you've learned from this webinar. And I would like to give a huge thank you to our panelists for sharing their time and knowledge and experiences with us today. Your insights and commitment to supporting survivors is deeply appreciated, and your voices are essential in creating change. We also wanted to extend our gratitude to everyone who attended, engaged, and held space for these important conversations. Your presence and support makes a difference. We'll be following up via email with resources as well as the survey link and a recording to this webinar. Thank you for staying and listening to this conversation. And again, to our panelists for staying beyond the time. And to our panelists, any last thoughts or words to close us out?
Yes, I want to say thank you very much for having this conversation. For any accredited financial counselor Canada designees who are in attendance, I will send Loren the CEU code for today's session, and she can get that out to you as part of you completing this survey. So please complete the survey so that we know that you attended. But for everyone else, just remember to love yourself and to remember that you are important and you're worth it. And if you need support, start here. Reach out to the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, and at least we have a start.
I just want to say thank you so much for having me from down south, because I really appreciate it. This message is international, and it takes us all to help, the beware and be aware, and the different sides of each one of us brings a different expertise to this conversation, but we're all in it together because we're here to support. And thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Just a note, we will be sharing where to find all of our panelists, their websites, and their LinkedIn in the email with the resources and survey link and recording. All right. Thank you so much, folks. Have a great day. Take care. And we'll be following up with some of those resources.
Thank you.
Thanks
That was
much.
interesting.